Chapter 14 talks about topics, including coming up with your thesis statement, consideration of your audience, and starting to do your research for your speech. The objectives for this chapter include explaining characteristics of a good topic and a good thesis, identifying some elements of the audience that need to be considered when you're planning a speech, identifying some major sources of information that you can use and include in your speech, and then starting to understand how to assess the credibility of the information, the resources that you find. And I must say that some of the PowerPoint slides that I use on JetNet, and probably a few on my lectures here online too, are probably not the perfect example of what I would use in a presentation in a room on a screen. Um, so take that into consideration. Often the PowerPoints that I put on JetNet, when you're going to be looking at them up close or printing them off, will have far more words on them than what a good presentation slide would include. We will talk about speech apprehension and dealing with that because I know that's a big topic for a lot of students and a lot of people in general in chapter 16 when we talk about style and delivery in public speaking. Here are a few tips in dealing with speech apprehension, though, because if there's one thing I want to help you with during this course, and I think a lot of times my students have said that, wow, now I feel a lot more comfortable um, in getting up in front of people. I definitely want your anxiety about public speaking to be diminished somewhat. Hey, if I can do it, you can do it. Seriously. Here are some tips dealing with speech apprehension. I can tell you that, and not just from my own experience, but from what other people have told me, the more you do this, the easier it gets. Your comfort level will increase the more speaking you do. Believe me, it is true. Also, another thing you can do is just think of this as a conversation. I mean, by the time you do your speeches in this class, you will have gotten to know some of your fellow students in the class. I mean, we're all just here to this is all practice. This is all experience. It's all learning. Think of it as a conversation with your audience, with your fellow students. I want you to affirm yourself. I'm doing this, no problem, because you are. No problem. You can do it. You can do it. Feel your sameness with the audience. Hey, like I said a moment ago, we're all in this together. All of the folks in this class have the same apprehensions. You're not alone. No one's going to laugh at you because everyone has been in your shoes. Get the situation into perspective. It's a class. It's on the road to your ultimate goal of gaining your degree, gaining your certificate, whatever your goal is. This is just another step to get through to get to that goal. Preparation, boy, preparation is so valuable. Practicing, and of course, I will take you through the preparation steps as the textbook relates them, and we'll talk about them in class and on discussions on JetNet. So we'll take you through the preparation so that you should have a clear outline, and you will of course practice, and you'll really feel more comfortable with your topic and your information. Now, I will say that physical activity beforehand sometimes releases tension. I know it's hard to run a mile just before class, but there are some other little tricks I can share with you on how to kind of release that, throw off that little bit of tension you have before you talk. Avoid chemical tension relievers, of course. Never a good idea. So here are the 10 steps that the textbook suggests for preparing your speech. And I will say that as beginning public speakers, you should follow these in this order. As if if you get more comfortable with preparing speeches as you go along through the years, you may decide that something slightly different works for you. But for the purposes of this course, it's safest to follow these steps in this order. So, you're selecting a topic, you're selecting a purpose, you're coming up with a thesis statement. You're going to analyze your audience. That's an important part of the process. And we'll go through these different steps in the succeeding chapters. First of all, what are you going to speak on and why? It needs to be appropriate to you and to your audience. It needs to be substantive, which means it's worth your listeners' time. And the textbook says it should be culturally sensitive. Something that basically I would suggest something that people are going to find interesting and something that is important to you or something you choose to want to talk about. For the purposes of this course, I am going to let you choose your own informative topic because I found that people are more comfortable when they're talking about something they enjoy sharing. So that gives you a lot of leeway. Coming up with a topic. Sometimes asking, you might have a topic in mind. You might say who, what, why, when, where. For instance, I had a student a few years back who wanted to become a history teacher, a history professor. He said, I want to talk about the Roman civilization. And I said, well, that's a huge topic. You only have a few minutes to do your speech in this class. Can you narrow it down a bit? Is there an individual you'd like to talk about? Who? Would you like to talk about the life of Julius Caesar? What? What would you talk about? Why? When? Where? Break it down into smaller parts because you can only cover so much material in the length of time that you have. But asking yourself these questions will help you come up with different angles for a particular topic. Very importantly, you need to consider who will be your audience. Is your topic going to be appropriate for them? Will it interest them? What is their level of knowledge? You might also think, are they listening voluntarily? And if it's a persuasive speech, will they agree or will they be willing to listen? Now, let's put that last one, will they agree or be willing to listen, on the back burner for a while, because that will come up again when we talk about persuasive speeches. But as we're thinking about informative speeches, we'll think about these first few considerations. Is your topic appropriate and will it interest them? Now, going back to that gentleman from a previous class who wanted to talk about the Roman civilization. I remember another thing I asked him, I said, how interested do you think this audience will be? I mean, you're interested in it because you're interested in history. Think about some angle that you might put on that would interest people. Actually, after some discussion, he and I came up with and something that would fit into the time allotted. I think I had given that class between 5 and 7 minutes for their informative speeches. He came up with uh, pieces of structures that were still visible in the British Isles that the Romans had built in the British Isles, and were still visible today. And that was something that was kind of fun to show. He had pictures of some bridges and some different structures that were left over from the Romans being in the British Isles. And that was something that people could relate a little better to than just civilization as a whole and any more intricacies of that culture. So it's important to think about what will interest them, what's their level of knowledge. If they know nothing about this topic, don't make any assumptions that they know certain words, and you want to start them where they are, from where they're at. But we will talk more about that as we could talk about, you and I, if you come up with any particular topics that you want to kind of narrow down. Then before you do any of your research, you want to develop a thesis statement early in that research process. The thesis statement is always a statement, never a question. It's always a statement. And I would advise you to keep it as short and concise as you can. Now, coming up with this thesis statement at the beginning will keep you focused and on the track, because you want to keep all of your information within that thesis statement. The thesis is your main assertion. It is a statement of what the audience will learn. It helps focus the audience on your central idea, and it's stated early, clearly, and directly in your informative speech. You state the thesis very clearly near the beginning of your speech. And that tells the people what they will be learning so that they know why they are sitting there listening to you. Here's an example of a thesis statement. There are some time management techniques that students can use to be most successful in college. If you hear this thesis statement, what would you expect to hear from the speaker during this speech? Think about it. Here's another thesis statement, a different one. Effective time management is critical to be most successful in college. What would you expect to hear with this thesis statement? These are two entirely different thesis statements. The first one, there are some time management techniques that students can use to be most successful in college. I would expect that the speaker would tell us what those time management techniques are. The second thesis statement, effective time management is critical to be most successful in college. With that one, I would expect to hear how time management is critical to be successful in college. So be careful when you're coming up with your thesis statements. Once you have your topic and your thesis statement, you can start researching your topic. Now, this is a good time to start your draft outline. Your points, your main points. For an informative speech in this course, generally people have between 2 and 4 main points. And when you're starting your outline, you can begin with what you know about the topic, and then look up some resources and fill in. Your draft outline is going to be small. Start out with your main points and a couple of ideas of what they might be. And then when you start doing your research, you're going to tweak them. You're going to add points under them. We'll talk quite a bit more about that as we go along. But now is a good time to start your draft outline as you're beginning your research. Let's look at this thesis statement that we saw a moment ago. There are some time management techniques that students can use to be most successful in college. If this is your thesis statement, what are what do you already know or think you know about this topic that you might want to include? These will be the main points in your first draft outline. Now, let's just say, for instance, you could use a lot of ideas for your main points just to get started. Let's say I came up with use a calendar for one. That would be A. B in my draft outline would be plan your days of the week. And let's say we'll use for C, main point C for the time being, know your learning style. So those might be your main points right now. You may keep them, you might change them, but it's something to get you started with your research. You might look for research regarding using a calendar or using a planner uh, as a time management technique for college students. So just some way to get started. It doesn't have to be set in stone, but at least it's a place to start in your draft for your draft outline. Very important to consider the credibility of your sources as you are researching. Credibility is a degree to which a source is believable because you want your audience to believe what you're telling them. And you want your audience to believe that it's something they can use. It's some knowledge that has been tested or comes from some authority. We're going to talk more about credibility as we go through the course because it's very important. You want to put yourself in the place of the audience always and think about how they're going to view the information you're giving them. Will they believe it? And you want to appear credible too, that you are trustworthy and you care about giving them good information. I like this cartoon. Don't count on this to work. And to discuss this pressing international issue, we have three very beautiful people. Have you ever noticed that the news networks tend to use good-looking people to give us information? May not be the most credible, or they might be. We just don't know. But don't count on that alone.